Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really appreciate you. And I have a fantastic guest with me today, as usual, as well. Her name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. And after spending 25 years as a kinesiologist and personal trainer, Marsha spent the past 5 years navigating her way through several major life and family crises when substance abuse entered into her family, affecting her two teenagers at a very young age. It became her mission to share her story more openly, and since then, she wrote in 3 collaborative books, launched her podcast called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, and released her best-selling solo book, When She Stopped Asking Why. That's just such a great title. Marsha is also a storytelling business coach and NLP master practitioner and trainer who helps people heal from their stories and share them with the world. Marsha, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wow, you have been on quite the roller coaster ride, especially the past 5 years. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and just say, okay, Marsha, tell us your story.
It's definitely a story with a lot of different moving parts to it. I just like to say when we started this journey, I was pretty much an average, boring, simple family. There was really nothing was on the radar, nothing that would have given me a glimpse as to what was coming. But we started to experience having, marijuana show up at our house when our kids were quite young. And when it did, it was immediately every time was like, no, throw it out, no, throw it out. But it just kept coming back. And no matter what we did, it never stopped. And so all of those times where people say, well, it's just a phase, let them go through it. It just happens. That's just not the case. And we're seeing more and more with research that is just not the case. For some people, it is gateway. It is something that impacts and affects them, especially as their brains are developing. So as we navigated those early years, basically just consistently trying to say the same thing and continually trying to stop what was happening, it just amplified. It just kept amplifying. And eventually it hit a point where it affected, infected, affected every single aspect of our lives and their lives, from school, sports, jobs, family. And we really tried to fight this demon as best as we could. And through the process, both my husband and I, we really navigated a lot of open criticism, judgment, shame, opinions. It's a topic that people don't want to talk about, and it's a very taboo topic. It's a plague type topic. So, people don't want to be near it, and it's very easy to give opinions. And so we kept trying so hard to navigate our way through it, find a way to help our kids as best as possible. And in the process, through a lot of twists and turns, I got to a point where I really felt like I was supposed to be doing something with this story. And I don't have a logical reason as to why I felt that. I just felt that I was so alone and I didn't want to feel this way anymore. And I've learned a lot about shame through the process. And through that experience, recognized how much can change when we can learn how to share our stories and how much our healing can help. Like it can help our healing. And then at the same time, building relationships, rebuilding with our kids and helping us to continue to move forward. So I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I didn't know that it was going to have a profound effect on all of us. But I just knew that I couldn't continue in the way that we were going.
Isn't that amazing how society treats people who are struggling with issues like that, especially people who are the closest to you? I found that in my own personal journey. It was almost like the people who were the closest to me were the biggest deniers, and the ones, that's where all the judgment was coming. And like you said, the shame and the guilt. And that's a really, really tough thing to overcome.
Very much so. And it does come from close to home. And I think it's really important when we talk about the word guilt is the fact that, like, most parents feel guilt every single day because we think we're not doing enough, we're not doing a good enough, etc. I can do that to myself.
Mhm.
we were in a space where it was constantly being, thrown at us that we had screwed up. And I mean, listen, I thought I screwed up. I did. Because I thought that this was my job that I was supposed to do, and I couldn't do it. And it really took going through a lot of counseling and support and crisis work to recognize that, we had done everything we were being asked to do, and we still had the problems. And that's because the problems weren't for us to solve. And that was probably one of the hardest points to accept, that this was not mine to fix, manage, or control anymore. And it was for mine to find a way to take care of myself so that I could be a source of support. One of the best lines my counselor ever said to me was that you need to be a source of support. If your kids ever come back to you, you need to be a springboard. And right now you're a big pile of quicksand. You couldn't save yourself if you had to. And as harsh as that was, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And she was right. She was absolutely right. And that's where a lot of it started from. So yes, the pieces of all the other things from other people that we had to navigate was just more icing on the cake of a really, like, a nasty cake that I don't remember signing up for. So it was an experience. And I say this, and I honestly do mean this. I carried a lot of anger and resentment for a long time. I don't now, because the way I look at it is I lived in it every single day and I didn't know how to handle it. So how could somebody from the outside looking in have a clue how to handle it? But I do think that through that process, I have certainly learned to become so much more non-judgmental as a person. And I recognize that every single person you meet is walking through something that you don't know about. You never know. You think you do, but you don't know.
And parenting is hard enough, but it seems like, there's so much pressure from society, from the outside, and I'm not going into like the judgment part of it, but even just the pressure from the outside, it's almost like you're constantly trying to fight the messages that your children are getting from other people, from society, from the media, from friends and other influences that might not have their best interests at heart.
I
So,
love what you're saying. I do. I love what you're saying. And I do think that there's this experience, this feeling that, how I did as a parent is completely related to how successful my kids are. How have they shown up and done everything that they're supposed to, tick the boxes, done the perfect things? And we're living in this very strange society where, my value as a parent is only based on the success my kids are having. And I think that all of us who are, I'm going to say, even in my age bracket, like, it's been our failures and our challenges that have taught us the most. So it's not serving our kids to stop them from experiencing some of the consequences of their own choices. Like, we have to let them live those experiences so that they can make their choices on their own. Because I've said it, actually I said it long before we even had them. They're not ours to keep. They're ours to raise so that they can make their own choices outside of us. They have to know how to do those things. It doesn't mean they can't lean on us and ask for support, but there has to come a point where our value as a parent can't just be, have they had a successful life or not? Have they done everything that they're supposed to? Because it's not for us to win. It really isn't. I just think we're walking alongside them personally, as opposed to, I used to say, I'm not here to drag and push and pull you through life. I'm here to walk beside you. And I want you to be able to make those choices yourself.
And to be able to catch them when they fall and then set them back up again and give them a little
As best
shove
as we
in
can.
the right,
Yep.
right direction.
Yep.
Exactly. Okay. So when they were going through this, was that when you decided, okay, it was time to walk away from kinesiology? Was that when you decided it was time to write your book? Was that the time you decided to start the podcast? So just take us on this timeline and share with us what the transition was like for you, what the motivating, thing was that said, I'm going to do all of these things. And did it come at all at the same time?
It's so funny when I look back at it, because again, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm glad that I didn't. I was asked to share my story in a collaborative book, and I think this is probably back in 2015, 2016. And I was like, put my story in a book. Like that just seems so out there. And I didn't know, how to do that. But by that point, I spent probably about 18 months starting to share my story online and really using my voice and really showing up and allowing myself to be seen and heard. And I had spoken on a couple of small stages. We had a really open relationship with the school. Like I was not the parent who was in there saying, not my kids. I was the parent in there saying, oh yeah, my kids for sure. This is the problem. I didn't try and hide it. And through that process, we actually built a very interesting relationship with them. And the school had us come in and speak to other parents because, and I give them credit because they're like, we don't know what to say because we're not walking in this. And so we did actually speak with a few parents. And through that process, I had this moment of like, I think this is something. I think we're supposed to do something with this. It just started to, plant a seed, and the seed starts to plant. And I remember saying to my counselor at the time, like, we're still in this space because nobody is talking about difficult things. And she recommended trying to find a Facebook group for moms. And I did. And when I entered that Facebook group and there was 100,000 moms in there, I just sat there and went, oh, holy crap, this is obviously not just me. Like this was just a moment of, but imagine from my standpoint, thinking I must be the only one because nobody else wants to talk about it. And that's not even close. So that was another spark. And then I said to her, like, we're still in this space where people are not talking about these difficult things. And back in like 2014, 2015, social media was extremely curated, like beyond curated. Like it was just, everything was look professional. And I wasn't even anything like that. So I remember her saying, maybe that's because you're supposed to be the one to talk about it. And it planted a seed. And once it planted the seed, I was like, what would that look like? That's crazy, but what would that look like? And so I started to share on a couple of small stages. And in the process, I had people who would stop me and say, like, that's my story. I've never told a soul. And I'm looking at these moms who have held on to a shame story for decades and never told a soul. And it was heartbreaking. Like, but what was happening is it was helping me to heal. It was helping me to anchor in my voice. And it was really giving me fuel that, like, I think this is something that I want to talk about. The other piece of it that I don't always share is the fact that we didn't look like what most families who were struggling with this looked like, which meant it was all the more powerful to start to show up and share because of that. And so I still hadn't really openly shared a ton. And then I got asked by to be on an interview for our CBC radio. And they asked me to come into the station. We did a little mock thing. And then they said, let's do it live. And so I'm like, okay, we'll do it live because nobody listens to that anyways, right? And yeah, nothing like throwing your life all the way out into like media land immediately. And that's what I did. And it really spread after that. And then I started to share my story in a couple of different collaborative books. But around 2016, I had this gut feeling, I think I have to write my own book. And I was so like, this is why I always say it's really important, like get in touch with yourself first, because you are going to have a download to do something. And then you're going to turn around and share it with the people closest to you. And you have to be prepared that they might say, that's the worst idea in the world. And that's what happened. And so I sat there and went, I think I'm supposed to do this. And so I did. I spent a year editing, writing. A lot of that year was on my own. And that book released in 2017. And I started my podcast shortly after that. And it took me 2 or 3 tries to get consistent with the podcast. And I actually think this is just being super open, is the fact that I had to learn how to receive support. I had to learn how to receive, comments and in a good way, because I'd spent so long hiding. And so when the book took off, I had a lot of media coverage, and it was like, whoa, that's a lot. Like it was just a lot to take in. And I had to learn how to receive that. And through that process, I started my podcast after that and have continued to write a few times since then. So I didn't actually leave kinesiology until 2020 during the pandemic, when my job was literally gone, and didn't come back for a number of months. But I can tell you that I journaled probably for 2 years before I left, before the pandemic, just journaling that I knew it was coming to an end. I just didn't know how it was going to happen. I felt like I was being called for bigger things. And this might sound funny, but I really felt like what I was doing could impact lots of people, whereas my job was one-to-one support. And I felt like it could be like a one-to-many to make a difference. And I just kept putting that belief that it was coming. It came in the form I didn't expect as far as a pandemic and all these things, but that's what happens, right? Like we don't always have control how it unfolds.
Wow. Okay. So there's a couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, I'm going back to the school because I'm giving them a whole lot of credit for reaching out to you and just giving you the platform and saying, hey, we don't know. We can't really talk about this because we're not walking through that. So kudos to them. And thank goodness that they did that. And that was kind of like a launching pad for you.
It was. I had no idea, but it was a launching pad. And I think that goes back to us having a very open relationship. Like I was there saying, look, I know this is a problem. I don't know what else to do. Because we didn't have a lot of other support. And at that time, our school system was very much, I can't say what it's like now, but at that time, they just passed them no matter what they were doing. And they were like, well, how do we pass them? Because they're not coming to school. I'm like, we fail them. And like, we can't do that legally. We legally can't fail them. And I'm like, they don't even go to school. Like, they don't even understand. And so we had a really open dialogue between us. And I think that's exactly where that launch pad started.
And the other thing was the Facebook group, finding that Facebook group. And when you logged on and saw how many other moms were on it, that must have been incredibly comforting for you.
It was very comforting. It was comforting. And it certainly lit a fire that I'm like, how in the world are there 100,000 moms in this group? And yet no one is still talking about it. Like, I just couldn't even understand that, but it definitely lit a fire under me. And it was a very heavy group to be a part of because we 100,000 moms, there was at least 1 or 2 passings every day. And it was very, very difficult. And there were 4 Canadian moms that we connected and really, we connected from a very early stage. And out of the 4 of us, 3 of them lost their kids.
Oh my
and
God.
I was the only one. And it was it wasn't lost on me that it was the 3 of them did. And so it's just to put into context how big of a problem this was at the time and how much it was growing. So yes, that Facebook group, that became a safe space for me to really start to, learn more and use my voice and etc. So I'm very grateful that I found it.
And to talk about your experience in such an open way where you were not going to be judged or there was not going to be any shaming. Now, I do want to ask, when you go with the books, in the first books, there were 3 that you did a collaborative writing in. When you did your first one, when you submitted the story and when the book went live or was published, did you have any of those, oh crap, moments? Like, what have I, okay. Because even though you were talking about it, it's different when it's on paper and there's no way to get that genie back in the bottle.
No. And that's, you've said it exactly, is this piece that, it's very different to go on a podcast and to share a story. Like, we know it still lives, but book is different. It's printed material and it's out there. And when it went out there the first time, I was so scared. I was so scared. I felt sick to my stomach. I was so scared, but I had this moment of like, I think I'm supposed to. And even in the beginning, my kids really struggled with what I was doing, and I understand it. Like, we were in the story still. Like, we were very much in the story. And I give 2 explanations in the fact that when you're in the story, you're replaying it, you're reliving it, you are still feeding off those emotions, you don't have great perspective. It's really not the ideal time to share a story. When you're on the story, you have perspective and you can see it differently. So I was very much in it, and it was a very vulnerable time to share. But I also think for just who I am as a person, it helped me to speed up and amplify my healing, to be honest. I think that's how it did for me.
Well, my second book is like a memoir. And when that was published, And it was just a year ago that I published that one. My first book, you know, it was exciting. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was, you know, wasn't that personal. And I had about 3 really bad weeks where I didn't even want to leave the house. I just wanted to crawl under the bed, but I couldn't fit. So just under the covers and hide. And it's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I done? And it took about 3 weeks. It's like, you know what? That story had to be told. It's out there. It is a really good story, a great story to motivate people or encourage other people. And so I was like, I'm at peace with this. It's going to be just fine. And then I went to the dojo and I walked in one day and there was a copy of the book sitting on Sensei's desk. I was like, oh, what have I done? What have I done? But it turned out okay.
I can relate to that because there'd be times I go and I would like, people would send me pictures. It's at the library. I'm like, how to get to the library? Like, how did that happen? Well, we ordered copies in. I'm like, oh my God, you can do that? Like, I didn't even know you could do that. And it was just seeing it in so many different places.
You're out there.
Yeah, very much out there. And it was, you know, even if I can share a little bit about the book process, when I was writing my solo book, again, as I said, a lot of people didn't think it was a good idea. I felt really called to do it. And I had lived in shame for so long. And probably the month before it was going to launch, I actually got a random phone call from an author. And he said, he's a very well-known author. And he said, I've been looking at your book. I've been looking at what you're talking about doing. It was David Chilton from The Wealthy Barber. And he reached out and he was like, I have some feedback for you. And I'm like, okay. So we spent like 2 hours on the phone and he said, you have to change the cover. And I'm like, I can't change the cover. The book is like ready to go. And he goes, oh, you're changing the cover. You want to change the cover. You have to put your face on the cover. And I'm like, not a chance. He goes, well, is it your story or is it your kid's story? What story is it? And he said, if you really want to get people's attention, put the mom's face on the cover. He goes, I've looked at all the categories, and he was 100% right. And so I just want to paint that picture because I went from not wanting to be seen or heard and hiding to releasing a really vulnerable story. And I shared parts of my story in that book that even some of my close friends didn't even know about myself. And when I did that, and then to have my face on the cover, it was like, okay, that was some growth. That was definitely some growth that I went through. And there's an interesting thing because nobody wants to be judged. Nobody wants to be criticized. But if you want to get ahead of the people who do judge and criticize you, you throw it in the conversation first. It's like, here I am. This is who I am. You don't like it. It's okay. I didn't ask. Like, it's okay. I didn't ask. And so I changed so much in that process, but putting my face on the cover was something. It was really something.
Yeah, that's very brave. You're being proactive rather than reactive. Yeah. And they had my first book. Yeah, I'm on the cover. Well, both of them. But the first one, you know, they had to talk me into using that photo. And I kept saying no, because, you know, I'm wearing shorts and it's like, it's pretty vulnerable putting yourself on the cover. And they talked me into it. And once I saw it, it was like, yeah, you're right. Because it does kind of tell the story.
He was exactly right. And I'm glad I listened. We delayed the book launch for 6 weeks. We changed the cover. We did everything. I called my publisher at the time. She's like, oh, I hate it when authors take advice from other people, but it's David Chilton. We're going to listen. And I think exactly right. And so I'm grateful that, you know, that was an opportunity that just came out of nowhere. So sometimes when you're really open, incredible things and people can cross your path. And it's like, are you open enough to listen and learn from them? And he was right. You know, he's like, even to this day, I think the reason the book has done so well is because almost all of that category includes parents who have lost their kids. There's not too many stories about like, how did you navigate through it? And from a mom's perspective, there just isn't. And so he was right. He was exactly right. That's what's made it have an impact and has made it connect with the people that it's supposed to.
Well, and plus having your picture on the cover, that makes it even more real that people can relate to you as a person. And knowing that this isn't somebody, sometimes when you read some of these stories, it almost feels like the author or the writer is disconnected from the audience, that they are standing on a soapbox or they're lecturing or whatever. But when you have your own story and your own face, and you're just, well, for want of a better phrase, spilling your guts and just really telling it like it is, people relate to that.
It's more relatable, and I did not know that at the time either. I'm going to say that, like, I did not know. We judge ourselves constantly about the things that we think are the most unrelatable parts of ourselves. And I always say it to clients, I say it to people, that the things that are the most, that you believe to be the most unrelatable in your life are actually the things that make you the most relatable to others. So stop trying to hide those parts, because honestly, that's what connects you to people. It really is what connects you.
So I want to talk about how you do help people and coach them and work with them. But before we go on to that, I do have one comment to make. As you were talking about the podcast, and then, like struggling to become consistent with it. And I just wanted the audience to know that Marsha really figured out how to be consistent with her podcast, because as of right this date, she has published over 540 some episodes and have recorded over 600. So she figured it out. How did you figure that out?
I stopped making it about me. I stopped making it about me. And I really kept checking inward. So again, when the book released, there was a lot of coverage, a lot of media, and I needed time to practice how to receive that and how to, just be able to be with that. And even though that's exactly what I asked for, like I did ask for that. So we have to, be mindful. And when I started at that time in 2017, I think I probably released like maybe 6 or 7 episodes at the end of the year. And I was in a space of judgment with myself, where it was like, this is not good. I didn't know how to podcast. I was recording on my phone, didn't have headphones, didn't have a mic. And I basically just put it out there for who wants to be on my show. And of course, all these people wanted to be on, but they weren't related at all to what my show was about. And so I really was disconnected with the purpose of the podcast. So I went back twice, and finally I hit a point where it was like, Marsha, do you want to do this or not? Like, what do you want from this? And it's like, I think I'm supposed to do this. And so I just allowed myself the time and space to really lean in and practice and do that. That also means that as it continued to grow, I had to say a lot more no's. Like I probably turned down like seriously 70 or 80% of the requests I get now. And sometimes I feel badly for that, but at the same time, it doesn't connect to what my show is about. My show is about people who literally have walked through a difficult story and they're doing something incredibly good with it out in the world. And once I got clear on that, it's like, all right, this is what we're doing. And podcasting is a long game. It's definitely a long game. People, like, I think only 3% make it past episode 21. So just to put in context. And so it is a long game. And I just got to the point where it was like, am I doing this because I feel like I have to, or am I doing it because I want to? And I'm like, no, I want to. And so that's the path that I just kept connecting with. And by the time we hit 2018 and 2019, like we were doing a consistent 2 episodes a week. And by the end of 2019, we were hitting 3 a week. And it's been 100% consistent since then.
How many are you doing now a week?
3. We do 2 solos and 1 interview. And our interviews are booked out now. Like they're booked out for at least 6 months now. We're a long ways booked out. Thank you, Podmatch. But definitely they have definitely been a big part of it. But yeah, I do 2 solos and they're short, but I've learned a lot about myself. So the podcasting has allowed me to really tap into my voice and my message more. And, people say, well, I wish I could speak like you. And I wish I could, have that kind of courage. I'm like, well, go back and listen to the first episodes, because it didn't sound like that. Like not even close. And I leave all of that out there. I will never remove my early work ever, because we all start somewhere, and where I am today is not where I'm going to be in a year from now. So it's that piece of it, allowing yourself to be a beginner and to keep going and connecting with the bigger picture of what you're doing.
Yeah, I tell people that when I go back to the very beginning, when I first started, And if I listen to some of the early episodes, I'm afraid my ears are going to bleed. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I put it out there, but it's staying there. It's not coming
Absolutely.
down. And the
Good for
other
you.
thing you said about all of the guests, like, you were just bombarded with guests. That's a really important message I want for the audience to take. If anybody out there is wanting to be a guest on a show, or they have a show or whatever, if it's not a good fit, you can be doing yourself more harm than good. So you
For
want to
both.
make sure, yes, on both ends, as the host and as the guest. And
Mhm.
since you already mentioned it, and I was going to plug them anyway, thank you, Podmatch. Marsha and I are on a fantastic platform called Podmatch, where they match guests and hosts together. And it is really, really a wonderful platform. So if anybody is looking to either start a podcast or to get on some shows, you might want to check out Podmatch.
I can't say enough about it. It has made my process easier and more challenging at the same time, right? A good challenge, but
Right.
easier in the sense that I don't have any shortage of guests.
Right.
But I can say, I'm going to actually say this if this is okay. I get a lot of pitches from PR teams. And
Yeah, I do
I
too.
know people who pay a lot of money for PR teams.
Mm-hmm.
I would seriously look at Podmatch, to be honest, because some of the PR teams that pitch me, I'm like, that has nothing to do with my show. Like, I can't. I actually got harassed by one because they must have said 3 times, this person is a perfect fit for you. Well, she does kitchen renovations. Nothing
Oh my
against her,
goodness.
but I'm going, it's not even remotely close to what my show is about. You're better off to go spend, and I bet you it's significantly cheaper to do Podmatch than it is to have a PR team. And so this has allowed me to connect with and really added the value of the conversations. Like my podcast editor is like, your level of conversations has just stepped up. I'm like, it's because I'm getting people that are aligned, right? It's definitely makes a big difference. So in the beginning, if you're a people pleaser and you're starting a podcast, just be mindful, because you're going to have to say a lot of no's. If in your podcast is your brand. Like I named it Own Your Choices, Own Your Life in 2017 because those words saved my life. To this day, I still use those words all the time. Like they're part of me. I didn't pick something that was, so specific that I couldn't move or morph or however I do it. And so it's really important that it's your brand, and what you choose and who you have on as guests and what you talk about, it needs to be consistent. Because if it's not consistent, you will lose people in the process.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you for adding all of that. That's really great. Yeah, podcasting is a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy, and it's definitely a labor of love. And the other thing though about podcasts that makes it so much easier, everything is so well organized in one place. It's like, okay, what is my week going to look like next week? Oh, here's my schedule. Here are the links. Here's all this information. Here's the guest's bio. I can get my show notes not only from your bio on Podmatch, but then I go to your website and do a deep dive. So it's really, really a wonderful way to get to know somebody, either as a guest or as a host, when you're preparing to be a guest on someone's show or to host somebody as a guest.
100%.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about how you help people with their own stories, own their own stories, and share their own stories. And I'm really, really very curious about the NLP and how you use that with your clients. So if you can start telling us about that, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. NLP was something that came into my life, neuro-linguistic programming. It came into my life in 2020, literally a few weeks after I had back surgery. I was in the hospital. I saw this pop up through my feed. This was pandemic time. I was by myself for 5 days. It was very scary time. Not to over, glorify it. I almost died twice. It was very intense time for me. And I remember having this moment thinking, I can't do life and business the way I've done it before. I have got to find a different way, because I'm that, generator that works her tail off and but also struggles with burnout on a regular basis. And so I really started to understand. I mean, most people look at NLP and thinking it is all about sales. And I think some people do share it that way. But to me, the way it was really shared with me is it can help you to really look at the stories that you were telling yourself, the stories that you have in your subconscious mind, which is responsible for 95% of your thoughts and your beliefs and thereby your actions, that a lot of them are formed before the age of 7. And so when I was in this space of trying to survive through what we were living in, I put my head down and I pushed through. I had to push through because that's what life was like. But as I'm laying there in a hospital bed, trying to figure out how I'm going to do, I mean, I had to learn how to walk again. Again, almost 30 years in physical rehab, I came to the conclusion that I was in that experience and had that experience so I could learn how to teach myself, because I really was my own patient. And I just went, you can't do it this way, Marsha. You've got to find a different way. And so with NLP, I really started to understand, like, what parts of healing had I skipped through? What was my nervous system going through? It actually went through a lot more PTSD than what I realized. And it was a counselor who said it to me. And I'm like, no, I don't. She's like, oh, you're classic. You're classic. And so I really started to understand, that there's different modalities that can help you to heal the story. You can't just consciously change the story and have it changed. When you walk through trauma, you carry that trauma in your body and it stays and it festers. And for some of us, we grew up in the generation where you push it down, you just keep moving. We don't have time for that. And that was almost a badge of honor. That's how I was raised. And so I really started to dive into that. And it became the work that I didn't know I needed, but I really, really was beneficial. And so I still do a lot of those tools on a regular basis. And I went through the process, took my practitioners, my masters, then decided to take my trainers so I can teach and, teach people how to become a practitioner and use those tools in their own business or for themselves. And it seemed to be so in line, because that is the work that we do when it comes to sharing a story, right? How do we share that story? How do we heal from that story? How do we put those words together? How do we practice using our voices? And so I've created my own coaching certification called Outspoken, which is really helping people to learn how to use their voice, right? Share your story in a podcast, write it in a book, speak from a stage, as well as support yourself and your clients through that process. I would love to see more and more coaches. Do you need a coaching certification to coach? Technically, you do not. But if you're going to talk about difficult things and you're going to talk about, trauma and PTSD in our bodies and overcoming some of these things, I think it's very important that we have this kind of training. And so that's where it all really started from. And that's how it's kind of formed. So that's one way that I support people in helping them to rewrite or share that story, build it out. And then the other way is I have a couple of people I'm working with, specifically authors who are wanting to publish their story. I've been in a space for probably a year, almost a limbo space of, do I create a publishing house? What do I do? I don't want to be a typical publishing house. I haven't had the best experiences, just putting that out there. And I just didn't want to do it like everyone else does it. And it's not surprising because I don't like the box. I like to, not be in the box. And so I started to look, and it's like, how can we build it out as a publishing agency? I get a lot of people who come to me who have spent a lot of money with a publishing house, and they're getting all of the basics, but then all these other things are a la carte, and there's all this extra added on. And they're saying, but I still don't have my story the way that I want. And that's really where I help people. So I've got a couple of male clients I'm working with right now, and I'm just helping them to really pull their personal story pieces in. And they're just putting incredible work out into the world. So from everywhere, from speaking, writing, like podcasting, coaching, and NLP tools, that's really the whole umbrella that I call it under Outspoken. And Outspoken is a very personal word for me, because that was the word I was told I was way too much of when I was younger. So I like that I use it.
Yeah. Well, it's a great name, Outspoken. It says it all. That one word says it all. It's just so powerful. And I really applaud you for doing that, because I think that we need to get our stories and share our stories, because if we do that and we communicate with each other, a lot more, I really believe this is going to be, the world will be a better place rather than all of the judgment and no, you're wrong and no, it has to be this way. We all have something, you said it so beautifully. We all have something that we're going through. You know,
Every
go
single
to the grocery store, every single person that you pass in the aisle is going through something. You might not know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way to be kind and compassionate at the same time still having boundaries.
Absolutely. You said it perfectly. You can be kind and compassionate and still have boundaries. Just because you are going to listen or support somebody doesn't mean you have to take it on either, right? Like you can have boundaries in place, and you can be there and listen to somebody. And somebody said that to me, like, what do I do? And I don't know how to fix that. I'm like, they're not asking you to fix it. They're just asking you to hold space. Like, can you just hold space for somebody? And I get that sometimes where people will share a part of their story with me, and it's like, okay, thank you. I don't judge you for that. And I appreciate you sharing. And they're like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, no, that's
Aw.
your, like, it's not me. You're like, how do you feel now that you've let that out? And they're almost always like, oh, I feel lighter. And I'm like, it's not meant to be carried. We are so much more alike than different. We honestly are. And you might be looking, I often say, you might be looking at the people in your life today and think, I can't share my story because of these people, but they're actually not the people that are meant to be supported by your story. They're like total strangers that you haven't met yet. You just haven't met them yet. And so you have to allow yourself, don't let the people in your life today be the reason that you do not move forward and learn how to share your story. Because the people that are in my life today, 95% of them, I didn't know them 6 years ago. 95%. Didn't even know them. And I couldn't even imagine my life without them now. I really couldn't. So I think incredible things can happen, and we are far more alike than different when we can learn how to share our stories, and we're all learning from each other.
Excellent. I loved every bit of what you said. And you're right. Let's share our stories and then let's have world peace. I really believe it could happen. I really do want
Nice.
world
That'd
peace.
be
Yeah,
really
that
nice.
really would be nice.
Yeah.
It would. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are wondering right now too, how are your boys doing today?
They are grown adults now, so 25 and 24, and they're very, very different kids in completely different fields. And I feel like we've done an incredible job of rebuilding relationships with them, right? Like I said, I was just coming off of Mother's Day. I spent time with one. I got a text message from the other, who lives out of town. And if there's anything my journey has taught me, it's like really to be grateful for the things that most people overlook. They overlook them every single day. And I don't expect perfection, and I don't expect this big elaborate thing, little things like, here, Mom, I got you a gift card for a bookstore because I know you love to read. And I'm like, oh, you didn't have to you don't have to do that, but it's the time. And so I'm really grateful that we actually have a better relationship now than we did 10 years ago. Is it perfect? No, because they're still kids and we're still all those pieces. But I'll tell you, it has definitely, they've come a long ways, and I'm super proud of them. And I often say it, I put it in my book. They're my best teachers. They're by far my best teachers.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And as we were talking before we were recording, and I said to you, there's nothing like being at the gates of hell and coming back from that to be able to appreciate the really smaller things in life and the finer things. They're not the big things, they're the little things.
Yeah. I love how you said that. I really do think that that is a powerful thing. And I'm grateful for that, because I'll tell you, I can find gratitude. It took me a long time to find it. I'm not going to lie. But I can find gratitude in the simplest things now, that I'm just like, I'm grateful for this moment. And so that's where we're at. They've grown up a lot, and I know they've walked through things that they should not have had to at their age, but apparently that's part of what their soul chose to do.
Well, I have to tell you, I have never said that phrase before. It's never even popped into my head before. It's just,
Wow.
I know that I've been there, but I just never had words to articulate it. So you brought it out of me. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
See how you are? That NLP is already working on me, and you haven't even, I haven't even been a client yet. So Tell people how they can get a hold of you. Where can they find you? How can they connect with you, and how can they work with you? Because I think, especially with the publishing and help with just being able to get the story out, it's so hard for people. You know what you think, you know what you want to say, but getting it out really takes some coaching and takes it. You need help.
You know what, it does. And I thank you for saying that, because a lot of people will come to me and say, I can just do this on my own. And my question is always, how long have you tried to do that for? And you know what, I've seen people who have had like decades goal of writing a book, and they still haven't started because it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming. But if it's called on you and you know you have a story to share, there are ways to learn how to share that story that leaves everyone in integrity and really can support the reader. I think that's a big mistake. If I can give one tip that people make when it comes to writing a book, is especially when you're sharing a vulnerable story, we get caught up in our story, and it's actually still about the reader. It has to be about the reader. Like, what's the reader going to walk away with? What are they going to learn from your story? And so those are the pieces that I think are really important. And I do have a super long last name, if you remember from the very beginning when you mentioned it. Sorry, it's very long. So I've made it very easy, and everything on social media is Marsha Van W. So if you start typing Marsha Van W, if you go to Google and type Marsha Van W, like 99.9% of what comes up is me. And you can connect with me there. My website's Marsha Van W, and my podcast is Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And like I said, we're on all podcast platforms. So,
and of course, all of these links are in the show notes forever and ever. So you can always find Marsha. And obviously, she's a wonderful person. Thank you so much for being on the show. I just love this conversation, and I love all of the tips and the advice that you give. And I also love the amount of grace that you moved through this journey with. I mean, it almost sounds seamless when I'm listening to your story, but looking at your face. And I know the truth, it's not seamless. And for people to make this type of a turnaround in something that has been so challenging with so many layers, you truly have the spirit of a warrior.
Oh, I am just going to pause for a second and receive everything that you just said. I love the warrior. But I'm a warrior with grace now. I am. And I think that really hits home for me, because I think that learning to walk through life with grace for myself and for others has been probably one of my biggest life lessons. Honestly, grace has been probably one of my biggest life lessons, and including grace for myself, which is not something I ever would have even considered doing before. But every single relationship we have is a foundation based on the one we have with ourselves. And so that grace is very important.
And it's very liberating too, isn't it?
It's so liberating. I mean, I actually think it's really funny, because I will cross paths with somebody that I knew, decades ago, and they will look and say, like, you were a completely different person. And I always say, I know, isn't it awesome? Like, because honestly, that old me would have never survived. She was not going to survive. She would have been a very miserable person at a point in her life. And so I'm so grateful that I had to walk through some of the most difficult times in order to change. And this change I'll take any day, any day.
That's another point, is that sometimes you do have to walk through fire to find who you truly are. And it isn't easy, but the end game, it's absolutely beautiful. You just feel so much more alive, so much lighter, so much happier, so much more joyful. And I'd rather live that life.
I agree. And and that is so true. And really, when it comes down to it, like finding that gratitude, anchoring in joy, being able to experience those things. I'm grateful for that.
Okay. Well, Marsha, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. Honestly, I love this conversation.
And everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this episode with everybody that you know and love. There's so many wonderful nuggets of information and hope and healing in what Marsha has to say. Do check out her social media. Do check out her website, her podcast. I was really overwhelmed this morning when I checked it out. It's like, damn, I wonder when this lady ever sleeps, but it's really pretty awesome. And just remember to share your story. Our stories are so important. They can help us heal, and sharing them with the world is actually going to help heal the world. At least that's what I hope and pray for. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.